Can everyone hear me? Okay, great. Hi, my name is Michelle. This is SIG-Apps. Eric, can you hear now? Maybe not. Anyway, welcome to the SIG. We have a few awesome demos today, and we have a finalized version of the SIG-Apps survey that we can now distribute. So let's start off with Eric. And then we'll have Ben Hall from Katacoda speak a little bit about Katacoda, and then we'll talk about the survey, and that'll be the agenda for today. So Eric, are you ready?
You are all doing SIG-Apps.
Right. Keep doing that. Eric, having some technical difficulties. All right, we're better now. Thank you for your patience. Eric is having some technical difficulties. So Ben, would you mind going ahead while we get him set up?
Sure, that's not a problem. Let me just share my screen. Okay, can everyone see? Excellent. Good. Okay, so thank you, Michelle, for the opportunity to have a quick demo and show you what Katacoda is. So we're building an interactive learning platform for software developers and software engineers. The aim is to teach people the latest infrastructure technologies, for example, Docker and Kubernetes, in an interactive way directly in your browser. So if you come down, we've got a number of different labs and courses available. So, for example, we've got one on just the foundations of Docker, running Docker in production, and what we've recently added is a way to learn and play with Kubernetes. So if we come in, we've got one to walk people through the basics and the foundations, from launching a cluster, deploying the example guestbook application, up to managing secrets, adding additional nodes, installing Weave Scope, and we're adding more on these over time and as more requests come in. So when you take a scenario, if we take the guestbook application, you get a very quick overview of what the scenario or what the interactive lab will be teaching you. And then you get dropped into a step-by-step guide along with an editor and an interactive terminal. And this is a complete environment. It's sandboxed and customized to you, but it is a complete environment, so you can do it whatever you want. So we've got a Docker instance running. It's already been cached with the Docker Kubernetes images, so it's very quick to get started. And then you can start taking the scenario. So we've got the first step is simply launch Kubernetes. And so we've got a little help script, which will go through, launches all the containers, downloads the kubectl, and now we've got the master running along with kubedns and the dashboard as well. And we can do things like check the house, and that displays the information. We can then walk through and complete the scenario. So in this case, it's deploying guestbook, which I'm sure many of us have done, but it's deploying Redis slave, and then a front-end controller. And so the aim is to walk you through, give you a step-by-step guide. So here we're talking about deploying and creating the Redis master controller. Users can click that to help them execute it. They can also then view the file in the top, and so they can see what's actually happening underneath the covers. And then they can run the command, run the kubectl, either by clicking or by using the bash prompt. And as we can see, we've now got the master running, and underneath you can see the Docker container. And it walks users through. So if we just continue stepping through, and users can take the time, there's some information about what each of the steps does and kind of gives them some context into what's happening. And then they can look in and see what's happening in the covers at any time. We deploy the front end, and now we've got our controllers, we've got our pods running, everything's happy. We can expose that to the outside, so then we can view it. And then at the end, we give users a link, and that's how they can access the demo application which they deployed, in this case, the guestbook. And the aim is to walk people through and help them get started. So if you look at something which we deployed today, we've got managing secrets, and it takes the same premise as what we did with the guestbook, but it's teaching the foundations and the different ways that Kubernetes actually works in practice in an interactive way. So again, we can launch a cluster, everything's sandboxed and isolated, but it's all been optimized to focus on learning, and then we walk you through the different scenarios. So in this case, we're creating a secret, we're populating the YAML file, and then using kubectl to create that resource and create that secret. And then we can go ahead and use that, in this case, use it as an environment variable, or we can use it as a volume. So we can see that we've already got our volume mapped out. We've highlighted some key informations, but we can just then go ahead and create that, and then users will be able to interact with it. For example, they can say get pods, and see that's running, do list, and then interact with the files and see actually how Kubernetes, how kubectl, and how everything actually works. Instead of just reading it, they can actually experience it and see it happening for themselves. And that's what our aim is. And what we want to do is then also use that to showcase other resources and other ideas. So for example, we have, because this is Michelle's event, we've got the Hound package manager. So we can showcase different projects and different open source communities and the work which they're doing. So in this case, we can download the Hound package, we can run update, and then this just walks you through exactly the same steps which we'd normally do, but in a very quick way, all step by steps, all focused on actually getting you started. And we can then use it in exactly we would on any other platform, and how we would do it in production. So for example, we've now just installed the Redis cluster, and because it's a live environment, we can poke around and see what's happening underneath and see how Helm has created all the resources for us. And so this is what we're planning to do. And we're adding more Kubernetes content as we go. And so this is the starting point, but we're also looking for external people to help us. So we have a Katacoda editor where people can come along and start writing their own interactive scenarios on the platform. So an example of what that looks like, here's the Kubernetes one. Everything's in Markdown. So this is the intro text, which users are shown at the beginning. Some underground activities which perform to configure the environment. And then it's just marked down to highlight and show what's happening, and just walking users through the steps. And then you can output that and you can see how it looks. At the end, you then come down to the bottom after you've completed all your steps and click View and Publish, and then your scenario will be live on the platform. Finally, we're also now embedding it into external websites. So if you wanted to brand the platform, and if you wanted to embed it into your own documentation, your own open source website, or your own company and documentation, then that's now possible. So this is an example we did with Mini Mesos. And again, it's taken the platform, which we built, but branded it and made the themes and made everything available related to the website itself. So we have the images, which Mesos requires, for example, Zookeeper and Mesos Master. And then it's a very great experience for users to start learning and to start experimenting with the products and walking through the different scenarios, from launching a cluster to automating Mesos with Elasticsearch. And obviously this has now focused more on writing code and writing Java code and to get started, but then they also have the terminal to go alongside it to run their commands. So that's what we're working on. I'd love to have feedback, and I'd love to hear people's thoughts on what we're building. It's all free, it's all available at katacoda.com. And thank you for your time. And I hope that was a very quick, brief demo of what we're up to. Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you so much, Ben. That looks so awesome. I tried out Kata Coda when we met at KubeCon, and I'm so excited to see all of these features. Does anybody have any questions for Ben? We have a lot of excitement in the chat room for you.
That's good.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Ben. Eric, are you up?
You're welcome.
All right. I'm going to go find Eric. One sec, guys. Yeah. While we're waiting, I keep doing that. I don't know what it is. Okay, so while we're waiting for Eric, let's talk about the SIG-Apps survey. Matt Farina couldn't join us today. He had a work meeting, but he wanted to share the SIG-Apps, like finalized SIG-Apps survey. So for those of you who were not here with us for the last few weeks, we've been talking about something we can do together as a group. So what the SIG-Apps survey does is it captures what people who are deploying applications and operating them inside of Kubernetes like and dislike, or like and want to improve about Kubernetes, and it collects suggestions as well. So I am going to paste, or I pasted the link, I'll paste it again in the chat. And if you could fill this out and also distribute it via Twitter or Slack or whatever means, that would be very, very helpful. We want to get this out to as many people as quickly as possible. And then we'll go ahead and do the data analyzing portion of it. And again, if you want to be a part of that group that analyzes the data, please talk to Matt Farina about that, or reach out to me and I can connect you with Matt Farina. He's leading that effort. So yeah, let me know if you have any feedback on that. And if you do tweet about this survey, if you could add a hashtag to it, like hashtag SIG-Apps, that'd be awesome. Just so we can keep track of going around. Viral, y'all. All right, I hear Eric. Eric, now you're able to speak.
Oh, yay. Here, I can't hear you, so one second. Well, so you guys can hear me or not?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh my God. Okay, I finally think I got it. Sorry, Linux on a laptop, everybody. So are we all good and ready? Because I can do that. Okay. Hi, everybody. So my name is Eric. I work at CoreOS, and over the 1.3 release cycle, I've been working on expanding the authorization options for Kubernetes. So I've been asked to give a little demo, and now since all of my audio stuff messed up, I guess I'll be short on time. If that's okay. Just to sort of give everybody a context of what I'm talking about when I say authentication and authorization. I imagine people are pretty familiar with Kubernetes and how it works, but basically this is Kubernetes. You have a bunch of stuff, and the highlight of this particular diagram for how Kubernetes works is that basically everything talks to the API server, right? So everything stores its data in etcd. You've got, if you're doing a deployment, you do like kubectl, create, whatever, that creates a record in etcd. Different things like controller and scheduler are looking for those records and will adjust them or schedule them and whatever. Then your kubelets, which are running on your workers and talking to your runtime like Docker or Rocket, will then say, hey, there's a container I have to run and run it. But the big part about this diagram is that pretty much everything talks to the API server. So when I talk about authentication, authorization, and what my demo is going to be about right now, it's basically going to be what are the things that are talking to the API server and what access do they actually have. So to show off the new authorization systems in Kubernetes, I have a little single node app over here, or sorry, I have a single node Vagrant machine. So this is running Kubernetes. So if I say, I have like a little kubelet running over here, that kubelet's running a bunch of containers that make up the Kubernetes system. And if I look at actually what those kubelet, what that is running, I can take a look at that. So this is my definition of my API server. And just as a reminder, the API server is the thing that everything talks to, right? So if you want to talk to etcd in Kubernetes, you're going to talk to the API server. And what this is doing right now is it's running my little hacked up version, which is bleeding edge latest from the Kubernetes repo. And there are a couple options down here that I want to just highlight. So the biggest one here is that we now have a new authorization mode out of 1.3. So this is authorization mode RBAC. What that means is roles-based access control. So what you'll be able to do is you'll be able to talk about permissions and dynamically set them and assign them to users, and just as you would in any roles-based sort of access control system. A really big part about this new authorization mode is that it actually uses a Kubernetes API group, and we'll explore a little bit about what that does. There's a couple other flags that I need to point out. So there is a super user called admin. That's really important because basically it's a bootstrapping problem, who creates the initial roles. And this flag says that the admin is allowed to, and we'll get into that in a second. There's also, I need to do some authentication. So Kubernetes splits up who is talking to the API server and what they're allowed to do into two separate plugins. One is saying that the auth and system, the authentication system, is saying who is talking to me, and the authorization system, RBAC in this scenario, is saying who can do what. So before I show you my demo with kubectl, we have to look at that token file. Kubectl auth token file. So this is a really basic token file, and what it says is if somebody hits the API server with a particular bearer token, then they will be logged in as that user. So I just have 4 users. I have the admin, who's allowed to do anything, and I have some users without permissions, user 1, user 2, user 3. Cool. So I'll go ahead and switch over to start interacting with it. So I have a big, terrible kubectl right now. But basically what that allows me to do is it allows me to say like kubectl config set context, or use context, excuse me. And then I can say like user 1, and I am now logged in as user 1 to Kubernetes. So I'm now using the bearer token of Kubernetes, of user 1. So I have not configured any rules for this particular system, and RBAC is turned on. So if I try to do anything, I shouldn't be able to do anything. And if I do kubectl, something like get pods, I see a wonderful error message that basically says I can't do anything. We're working on improving this error message, but that'll happen later. So obviously, if we're in a rules-based authorization system, we want to be able to create some rules. So I'm going to go ahead and become the admin user using this use context command again. And then I'm going to go ahead and set up some initial rules. So to get this particular error message is because nothing in my system can actually talk to like the /API and /discovery endpoints, basically. So it can't do version negotiation. So I'm just going to go ahead and create that guy, and we'll get into what that rule looks like later. But the first thing I want to do is I want to create a rule that allows user one to deploy some pods, right? So user one, let's say, would like to deploy a Postgres container, and right now it just can't. So how do we actually want to do, how do we want to give it the permissions to do that? So what we can do is we can say, what is it, pod deployer. Cool. So I've created an initial little role here. And what this is it looks like any other Kubernetes API object, and that's because it absolutely is. So you have your usual suspects here, right? I have a kind field, which, you know, this could be a deployment or whatever, but in this case, it's a role. I have this new API version. You'll notice it says V1 alpha. This basically means totally alpha, totally experimental. This is for you all to give us feedback about what this feature looks like in the next release. And then for 1.4, we're hoping to maybe get it to a more stable place like a beta. It also has some metadata. So the name is, the namespace is default and the name is deployer. And the important part about this is that we've set up some rules around this. So this particular role allows someone to do any verb. So a verb would be like get, put, post, delete, that kind of thing, to any service or pod. This also allows them, because we can define multiples, to interact with the extensions API group and make deployments. Cool. So let's go ahead and create that role. So kubectl create rules deployer. Cool. So now if I do kubectl get roles, I see I now have a deployer role. This config use context. This particular rule doesn't actually give anyone any ability to do anything. So roles alone, if I say get pods, which is something that I was allowed to do, I haven't actually given user one the ability to do anything with that role. So of course, they're not going to be able to. So in order to actually allow someone to use the role, we have to send up something called a role binding. What role bindings are is they just map users to roles. So this is a lot of YAML to basically say user one can act as the deployer role we just set up. So if I do kubectl create rules deploy, get role bindings, we'll see that deploy is, we've created a new role binding for user one. We can use the context again and become user one. So I can now get pods because that original role binding says I can do that. And in fact, I can actually do things like create a Postgres container. Cool. So I've get pods. So I've now have the ability to do all the things that I want within this particular namespace, and so on and so forth. So that's really about it. There are a lot of special rules, like, for instance, that initial rule I set up is something called the cluster rule. Cluster rules are just, cluster rules are just like roles, except they apply across the cluster. So they can apply to things like nodes, which aren't inherently namespaced, or so on and so forth. And then I can create a cluster role binding, which this particular one lets anybody hit the non-resource URLs, which is a fancy way of saying like /API or /Swagger or whatever. And then this one just says anybody in the cluster can use that. So that was the initial one I set up to let everybody do the things that they want to do. And obviously you can get pretty fancy with this. So I have another example of a rule that says, so this is a cluster role, which is a pod reader. And this allows someone somewhere in the cluster to get, watch, and list pods. And I can create role bindings further on that say, okay, user 2 in the namespace default can act on behalf of this pod reader. Specifically that this person in namespace default has the ability to get, watch, and list pods, and so on and so forth. So that's about it for the demo. There will be a lot more documentation as 1.3 actually comes to fruition. There will still have a couple of bugs outstanding, so these examples may or may not change. But concretely, it's going to be like spelling corrections, and that's about it. But yeah, we're hoping that everybody uses these things in the coming release to experiment with dynamic access control for their applications, and gives us lots of feedback so we can make it even better for 1.4. Awesome. Are there any questions? Can I go to the comments somehow? Or am I stuck in here? Okay, so I foresee lots of questions about using this. Yeah, so there is a full, there are full documentations. So Mike, there are going to be a lot more documents in the actual authorization document. The canonical one in the Kubernetes IO. Yeah, the pull request open and are trying to get basically everybody to understand exactly what we just did. Cool, so the user could get read auth D in a namespace, but write privileges in other namespaces. Yeah, absolutely. So role bindings are inherently only for specific namespaces. It is up to the admin to configure everything dynamically, and namespace is sort of a good place to separate different permissions. So you can have particular permissions in one namespace and different permissions in another. Is the goal for a beta in 1.3 release and stable in 1.4? No, so 1.3 is the release that's coming out in a couple weeks, and that will be alpha for that particular one. So, this may or may not be one of the first times that anyone has ever used this on a cluster. So this demo. So we're hoping to get a lot more feedback in 1.3 and work out all the kinks, and then go beta for 1.4, hopefully. So earliest it could possibly go stable is 1.5, but even that I don't want to make promises about. Are there any other questions up there? All right, well, if there are no more questions, I have some links to this particular demo. So I'll just go ahead and post them in the chat. So that's the Vagrant box I was actually using. You can just do Vagrant up, follow the README, and you'll actually get all of the abilities to do anything. So you can poke around on something actually using my particularly hacked up version of the Hypercube. And that'll be up with roles and everything. So yeah.
Thanks so much, Eric. That was awesome. Thank you, everybody, for joining today. We're right at 10:30, so I'm going to let everyone go. Please share the link to the SIG-Apps demo. I'm pasting it right now with, paste a link to the SIG-Apps survey. I just did that in the chat, so please share that with everyone you know.
So Michelle, I had a quick question.
Sure.
I guess, I don't know if Clayton's on the phone right now either, but we were chatting this morning. We were interested in knowing if anybody in the community or on this call is exercising particular job frameworks on top of Kubernetes, and if we could get maybe an item on an agenda in the future for somebody to kind of share their experience or their particular challenges. So I don't know if anybody on the call wants to chime in now. And obviously, I guess that could be covered in the survey as well, but is there anybody today actually exercising particular job frameworks that they want to discuss in the future?
Yeah, does anybody have any feedback here? Let's put this on the, let's put this as an agenda item for the next SIG-Apps meeting, and have a full-out discussion about it. How does that sound?
Yeah, sure, that's fine.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Oh, that was cool.